I'm Hashi Mohamed. I'm a barrister practicing in London in planning and environment law and public law generally. I'm also an author of two books. One is called People Like Us, What It Takes to Make It in Modern Britain, which is all about social mobility. What does it take from the moment you are born, where you are born, and how you grow up, to whatever top profession or any profession that you're seeking to achieve, what's happening in between those particular junctures of your life. And the second book that I recently wrote was all about the housing crisis. Housing and planning are very much talked about these days, and I wrote about what it means to society to not have a roof over your head, a place for you to call home, and that safety and security that starts out in your life that can make such a difference to your future. And that book is called A Home of One's Own: Why the Housing Crisis Matters. Well, I think my background, I came to this country as a young boy who was a refugee. My parents were never formally educated. My father passed away when I was 9 years old. And so I came at a time when I was the most vulnerable I could be as a young child. And growing up in a country where you don't understand the language, where you don't understand the culture, where you don't have the adults who can help you navigate that society, it has been an incredibly arduous start to life. So today, when I think about what I do, I think about a huge amount of resilience that is born out of my background and where I'd come from, a huge amount of discipline in what I'm trying to achieve and the focus that I'm trying to achieve it with, and generally also bringing a different personality, a different outlook in life, a different way of thinking about problems to the table, which hopefully means that it will make a difference in how I approach problems, how I solve problems, and ultimately also help people understand the issues in a different context. And so what I am, who I am, and where I've come from shows up in many respects, both in my day-to-day job as a barrister, but also in my reflections in the books that I have written and some of the broadcasting that I undertake. The reason why I described my upbringing in particular as remarkably unremarkable was really because there are so many people who've arrived in similar circumstances to me in this country who were given an opportunity to start again. And so when I think about what we went through and the difficulties of war and displacement, the tragedy, the difficulties growing up on state benefits, moving from one squalor council accommodation to the next, when I think about all of that, I don't think about that as being something uniquely special to us. And the reason I say that is because there are so many people who have suffered in similar circumstances, whether they've originally come from where I've come from, or when you think about the people dying on the channel right now who are desperate to make it to a safe place. When you think about those perilous journeys that they're making, it tells you that they obviously find life on a boat that could capsize safer than being on land. And so in that sense, that's why I constantly talk about that life of being, a starting point of being remarkably unremarkable. But what's different, I guess, for me is where I am now and the odds that I have overcome. That's slightly different. And that's a challenge that I have succeeded in overcoming. And that is through a range of things, whether it be luck, the right people believing me in the right moments, the focus, the determination, the discipline, the drive, and constantly trying to learn more and better myself. I think one of the criticisms that I would have of the diversity and inclusion agenda is that it misses the point about what diversity and inclusion is about. Diversity and inclusion is really about harnessing talent as early as you possibly can, with a view to ensuring that your workplace is truly representative of people in society who are talented enough, hungry enough, focused enough to be part of your organization. And that requires a great deal of time, investment, and focus in trying to ensure that no matter who comes through your door, the first and most important thing is, are they good enough to be working with you? And so one of the things that I always tell corporations is, think beyond the polish and start thinking more about the potential. And one of the reasons for that is because you'll get a lot of people whose knowledge is very thin, but whose ability to project that thin knowledge expertly in a way that inspired confidence is huge. And what that means is then they are usually caught up in that polish, and they're not able to see that this person really doesn't have a huge amount of potential, but you're starstruck because of the fact that they're able to project that quite well. Whereas somebody else who has a huge amount of potential is lacking the polish and the ability to be able to express that, to be able to share those thoughts, to be able to actually inspire confidence in the individuals who are interviewing them. And so for me, what now we're dealing with the diversity and inclusion is you're seeing more people who treat it as a numbers game. How many more Black people can we get? How many more women we can get? How many more trans people we can get? How many more kind of disabled people can we get? In a way that I think is completely contrived, it's short-termist, and it ultimately does huge amounts of damage to the progress we're making. And so take a step back. When you're thinking about true diversity and true inclusion, are you really focused on what matters? The talent, the polish over potential, the ability to ensure that people are having fair access to opportunities, the ability to ensure that you're reaching as many members of society as possible, trying to go beyond the metrics that you normally assess people based on a CV, a cover letter, an interviewing technique, etc. But actually beyond that, to try and reach a potential that allows you to truly, truly be representative of society, and not this kind of contrived way that plays a numbers game. Wow, it's a very, very good question. I think the one social issue that I think most people in society and corporations need to be realistic about is when it comes to proper social justice and equity in society, we are not going to achieve that in a very quick, short-term period. And so what I really want to try and make people understand is the problems that we have of inequality, inability for people to truly realize their full potential, and generally social mobility as a whole is not something that we just one day woke up and had to deal with. This is a problem in the making for decades. This is an issue that has successive governments have been trying to grapple with. Generations have come and gone. And social mobility has either become stagnant or has faltered, depending on the metrics that you use. And so the realism that I try and inject into this conversation is to say that not everyone who wants to be a lawyer will be a lawyer. Not everyone who wants to be a doctor will make it, not because they don't have enough talents, but because there aren't enough opportunities, or there is somebody who has slightly more talents than they do. And so society needs to become realistic about the progress we're going to make is going to take a significant amount of time. There are lots of people whose potential are yet to be properly harnessed, and that will take time. But equally, it does not mean that progress and that journey means that everyone who wants to be a lawyer will be a lawyer, or that everyone who wants to do a certain job, become a footballer for England, will become a footballer for England. It's not going to happen. But what we can achieve, and what is a realistic goal, thinking about realism again, is how do we make sure that every single child has a fair start and has a fair chance at realizing whatever potential they might have? And that, for me, is possible. And that's a realistic view. Now, those children, we know from studies after studies that I've written about, the first 4 to 5 years, and what happens in that child's life in those first 4 to 5 years, can determine how far they go, how well they do, and generally whether they become productive members of society. And so my realistic advice is always think about what you can do within the time frame that you have. Be realistic about the progress that we are going to have to try and make in a longer time frame. And then be realistic that not everyone will get what they think they want or need, but that doesn't necessarily represent failure. It's quite encouraging that we have a very diverse cabinet, very diverse ministers, and the new government is obviously keen to try and progress things. But I have one particular criticism, which is around the way in which they handle child poverty. I'm a big believer in tackling child poverty and particularly helping children under the age of 4 or 5 to try and genuinely make progress on social mobility. And so for me, it's absolutely critical that they think about, for example, at the moment, repealing the 2 children only child benefit rule. The Conservative government had introduced a particular legislation that said, if you have 2 children, that's the most amount of child benefit you're going to get. If you have more, you're not going to get a penny more. And I think that's had a devastating impact on children. Now, the idea being that you should be responsible for as many children as you have, I get that. I can see the fiscal and the financial reasoning behind it. But you are effectively punishing children. You're effectively punishing children who did not choose to be born in those environments. And their parents don't have the funding and the support to help them grow up. And so for me, if social mobility means anything to this new Labour government, and the signs suggest that it does, you've got to deal with child poverty. You've got to deal with how you help children at the earliest possible opportunity, both in health, in society, in schools, in opportunities, and generally ensuring they also have a roof over their heads, because housing is critical to all of that. What I would say to them is, number one, you need to remember that you are part of a wider society. You need to remember that your business doesn't function in a vacuum. It functions in a wider society to which you owe a responsibility. And whilst, of course, you might be conscious of ensuring that you give the best returns to your shareholders, you also need to understand that society as a whole has a vested interest in ensuring that if you succeed, they succeed as well. Second, I would say that corporations and leaders need to also understand that all of the answers to our societal problems do not necessarily lie with the government only. Society does not just depend on governments to solve the problems. And I think leaders and corporations must also pull up their sleeves and try and contribute to the solutions in society. Especially in uncertain times, the government can't resolve everything, and it certainly can't resolve everything very quickly. And it's critical that corporations and leaders understand that and make a difference. And so for me, the best advice I have for them in these uncertain times is get involved, try and do as much as you possibly can to improve society. Remember that you are a part of a wider society, and remember the government hasn't got all the answers and can't resolve everything on its own. There are lots of people who approach me at events who might have been inspired by my work, who might have been interested in my work previously. And one of the striking things about those people is often that they often think that what I have done has come about quickly or easily. And so what they're often looking for is a quick answer, a quick pill that they could swallow and that their life could make progress. And the number of times I have to break it down to them that what you see here right now and what I have achieved has taken decades. It has taken a huge amount of time, many false starts, many steps back and forward. And it's not something that you just sort of click your finger and it happens. And so for me, that's probably been one of the key things is in all the questions they ask, there's that one theme and thread that runs throughout, which is, tell me, I want to be a barrister like you. How did you do it? Can I do it tomorrow? What's the answer? And having to try and talk that through. In terms of corporations and companies, I would level the similar kind of accusation against them, which is that we really want to hire people like you, really want to have more women in positions of leadership. We need a sort of more diverse workforce. Tell us what we should be doing and how should we resolve this tomorrow. Again, they don't ask it as simplistic as that, but the thread, the theme that runs through these questions is that. And again, you have to break it down to them. This problem didn't come about overnight. The answers do not come to you in your sleep. And the challenges do not disappear because you have found one simple narrative. This will take time. There will be false starts. It will take many more people to be involved for many, many more years for us to truly make progress. And so that, for me, is probably the best advice I'd give. I mean, I've got many more books in me. I'm currently working on a children's book, which is all about the safety and security of the home for a child, based around my children and based around what they like doing and how much I enjoy spending time with them at home. And so that is something that I'm currently working on. I'm going to find hopefully an illustrator for it. That's something that I'm keen on doing. In terms of what's next for me, I'm very, very focused on the profession, the barrister world. The current government is talking about many reforms to come forward around planning and housing. I'm very keen to be involved in that. I'm keen to be at the forefront of trying to make a difference in that. So all to play for, and I'm not leaving the profession just yet, and I'm hoping to write more books, do more speaking engagements, travel the world, and generally enjoy these moments, however uncertain they may be.